In December 2008, while the global financial system was collapsing, one man sat calmly inside his luxury Manhattan apartment. Outside, panic spread through Wall Street. Banks were failing. Retirement accounts were disappearing. Families were losing everything they had worked for their entire lives. Inside that apartment, Bernie Madoff already knew the truth. For decades, he had been trusted by billionaires, charities, banks, celebrities, and even government regulators. He wasn't just respected, he was admired. People called him safe. They called him conservative. They called him a financial genius. That night, Bernie Madoff finally admitted something he had hidden for nearly half a century. It's all a lie. What followed became the largest financial crime in human history. This is not just a story about money. This is a story about trust, and how one man weaponized it. Bernie Madoff didn't carry a gun. He didn't threaten anyone. He never robbed a bank. And yet, his crime destroyed more lives than many violent criminals ever did. Retired couples lost their life savings. Cancer research charities shut down overnight. Universities lost endowments. Entire families were financially wiped out. And the most frightening part? Bernie Madoff did not look like a criminal. He looked like the kind of man you would trust without hesitation. So the real question is not just what he did. The real question is, who was Bernie Madoff, and how did the world fall for him? Bernard Lawrence Madoff was born on April 29, 1938, in Queens, New York. His parents were ordinary people, not wealthy and not powerful. Growing up, Bernie watched adults struggle financially. He learned early that money meant security, stability, and respect. Teachers described him as intelligent, confident, and persuasive. He wasn't aggressive or loud. Instead, Bernie had a calm presence. When he spoke, people listened. Even as a teenager, he understood something that would later define his entire life. If people trust you, they stop asking questions. That understanding would become the foundation of his empire. Bernie attended Brooklyn College and later Hofstra University, where he studied business. But while others studied textbooks, Bernie studied human behavior. He learned what made people feel safe. He learned what made people feel special. He learned what made people feel chosen. During his college years, Bernie borrowed money from friends and family to experiment with small investment activities. At first, nothing he did was illegal. But something important happened during this period. He realized that people didn't want complex explanations. They wanted certainty. If Bernie spoke confidently enough, people believed him. And when people believed him, he felt powerful. This wasn't greed yet. This was control. In 1960, at just 22 years old, Bernie founded Bernard L. Madoff Investment Securities. At first, it was a legitimate business. He worked as a market maker, matching buyers and sellers of stocks. He embraced computer technology long before most of Wall Street did. This gave him an edge. He was faster, more efficient, more modern. Wall Street noticed. Bernie carefully crafted his image. He dressed modestly. He spoke calmly. He avoided flashy behavior. He wanted people to see him as conservative and disciplined. He didn't want to look rich. He wanted to look trustworthy. That image worked perfectly. Over time, Bernie Madoff became one of the most respected figures on Wall Street. He even became chairman of NASDAQ, a position that made him nearly untouchable. People thought, if he runs NASDAQ, how could he possibly be a fraud? Clients described him as careful, cautious, and ethical. He refused many investors, not because he didn't need money, but because rejection made him appear exclusive. The more he said no, the more people wanted in. This wasn't accidental. It was psychology. When access is limited, people assume value is high. Bernie understood this better than almost anyone. Then came the moment everything changed. In the early 1970s, Bernie faced a problem. Markets were unpredictable, and clients expected consistent profits. Instead of explaining risk, Bernie chose an easier solution. He lied. Just a small one. When a trade lost money, he reported it as a gain. When returns were weak, he adjusted the numbers. No one noticed. Nothing bad happened. That moment mattered more than anything else. Because once a lie works, it becomes easier to repeat. Bernie soon realized something dangerous. He didn't actually need to trade at all. When investors asked for profits, he could simply use money from new investors to pay older ones. Everyone stayed happy. Everyone believed. This is called a Ponzi scheme. But Bernie's version was different. It was hidden behind legitimacy, technology, and reputation. It wasn't loud or obvious. It was quiet, elegant, and deeply concealed. For years, no one suspected a thing. Bernie married Ruth Madoff and had 2 sons, Mark and Andrew. To the outside world, they were a normal, successful family. Inside the business, family members worked alongside him. But Bernie lived a double life. To clients, he was honest. To employees, he was brilliant. To family, he was protective. In reality, everything depended on deception. Every statement was fake. Every profit was invented. Every success was an illusion. There were warning signs. Returns were too consistent. Markets crashed, but Bernie never lost money. Some analysts noticed the math didn't add up. Whistleblowers tried to raise alarms. But Bernie had something stronger than truth. He had reputation. People assumed someone else had checked. Regulators assumed other regulators had verified him. Investors assumed banks had done their homework. That assumption destroyed everything. By the late 1990s, Bernie Madoff controlled billions of dollars. But beneath the success, there was nothing. No trades. No profits. Only debt. The entire system depended on one thing. New money never stopping. And then, in 2008, the world changed. The global financial crisis hit. Investors panicked. They demanded their money back. And for the first time in decades, Bernie Madoff could not deliver. The illusion began to crack. This was only the beginning. In the next episode, we will uncover the whistleblower who tried to stop Bernie Madoff years before the collapse. We will expose how regulators failed again and again. And we will see how the greatest lie in financial history finally started to fall apart. This was the rise. The fall was coming. But before it arrived, Bernie Madoff's world still looked perfect on the surface. To his investors, he was calm. To his employees, he was confident. To regulators, he was cooperative. Behind closed doors, however, Bernie was carrying a secret so heavy that it could only end one way. Collapse. For years, Bernie Madoff lived inside 2 realities. In the first reality, he was the most respected man on Wall Street. A former chairman of Nasdaq. A pioneer of electronic trading. A man who seemed to understand markets better than anyone else alive. In the second reality, there were no real trades. No real profits. No real strategy. Just spreadsheets. Printers. And lies. Every month, fake account statements were generated. Dates were adjusted. Trades were invented. Profits were carefully calculated to look believable, not too high, not too low. Bernie understood something critical. If returns looked boring, they looked safe. And safety was his greatest selling point. Inside his firm, operations were divided carefully. The real trading business and the fake investment advisory business were kept completely separate. Employees in one department had no access to the other. This separation was intentional. It ensured that no single person could see the full picture. Bernie controlled information like a dictator controls borders. Nothing moved unless he approved it. No questions were encouraged. And no one was allowed to challenge him. Fear, loyalty, and silence became the foundation of the company. Many people later asked the same question. How could no one know? The truth is uncomfortable. Some people suspected. Some people doubted. But very few people wanted to know. Bernie's clients were rich, powerful, and influential. They enjoyed the steady returns. They enjoyed feeling special. They enjoyed being part of something exclusive. As long as the money kept coming, curiosity stayed quiet. There were moments when the system nearly collapsed much earlier. Market crashes. Recessions. Global crises. Each time, Bernie adjusted the numbers. Each time, the illusion survived. With every close call, Bernie became more confident and more reckless. He began to believe he was untouchable. At home, Bernie played the role of a devoted husband and father. Ruth Madoff believed in her husband completely. Their sons worked in the legitimate side of the business, unaware of the fraud hidden just floors away. Family dinners were normal. Holidays were celebrated. Life looked ordinary. But Bernie carried his secret everywhere. Every handshake. Every smile. Every promise. By the early 2000s, the numbers had grown unimaginable. Billions of dollars flowed into the firm. Charities trusted him with donations meant for hospitals, schools, and research. Entire communities unknowingly placed their futures in Bernie's hands. What they didn't know was devastating. The money was gone the moment it arrived. It had already been spent. Used to pay older investors. Used to fund a lifestyle built on deception. Then came the warnings. A financial analyst named Harry Markopolos repeatedly told regulators that Bernie's returns were mathematically impossible. He provided detailed reports. Clear explanations. Step-by-step proof. But Bernie's reputation protected him. Regulators assumed that someone else had already verified the numbers. Banks assumed regulators had approved him. Investors assumed everyone had done their due diligence. In reality, no one had. Bernie watched all of this silently. He knew the system depended on one fragile condition. Money must keep coming in. As long as new investors arrived, the lie could continue. If they ever stopped, everything would collapse instantly. And then, in 2008, the impossible happened. The global financial crisis hit. Fear replaced confidence. Trust vanished overnight. Investors who had never questioned Bernie before suddenly wanted their money back. Not some of it. All of it. Bernie did the math. For the first time in decades, the numbers could not be fixed. There wasn't enough money. There never had been. The illusion that had survived for nearly 50 years was finally breaking. And Bernie Madoff knew something terrifying. There was no escape this time. In the next episode, we will follow the final days before the collapse. The confession that shocked his family, the phone call that ended everything, and the moment the greatest financial fraud in history finally came into the light. This was the rise. The fall had already begun. In public, Bernie Madoff continued to play his role perfectly. He answered phone calls calmly. He reassured nervous clients. He told them the market volatility was temporary, that patience would be rewarded, just like it always had been before. But inside his mind, something had changed. For the first time in decades, Bernie was not in control. Bernie had always believed that time was his greatest weapon. Time allowed lies to settle. Time allowed doubts to fade. Time allowed new money to replace old obligations. But the financial crisis of 2008 destroyed time itself. Suddenly, everyone wanted answers at once. Hedge funds demanded liquidity. Charities needed cash to survive. Wealth managers panicked as their own clients pressured them. The requests weren't emotional anymore. They were urgent. And they were relentless. Inside Madoff's firm, tension filled the air. Employees noticed subtle changes. Phones rang longer than usual. Meetings happened behind closed doors. Bernie's calm confidence began to feel rehearsed. Yet no one dared to ask the obvious question. Because asking meant risking everything. Jobs. Careers. Loyalty. And in some cases, family. Bernie Madoff had built more than a Ponzi scheme. He had built a culture of silence. People trusted him not only because of his reputation, but because questioning him felt dangerous. He was powerful. He was connected. He was respected. And for years he had always been right. Until he wasn't. At night, Bernie lay awake doing the same calculations again and again. Not market analysis, but survival math. How long could this last? How much money was still coming in? How much was going out? The answers terrified him. The inflow had slowed dramatically. The outflow was accelerating. For the first time, Bernie faced a reality he had avoided his entire life. There was no clever fix left. What made the situation worse was that Bernie could not confess publicly, even if he wanted to. Confession meant prison. Confession meant disgrace. Confession meant destroying his family's name forever. And most importantly, confession meant admitting that the man the world trusted never truly existed. Bernie wasn't just protecting money. He was protecting an identity. For decades, Bernie had convinced himself that he would eventually fix everything. That one day, he would trade his way out. That markets would align. That the lie would quietly disappear. This belief kept him going. But in 2008, that belief died. Markets were collapsing. Liquidity was gone. Confidence was shattered. There would be no miracle. Bernie's sons, Mark and Andrew, noticed the stress. They asked questions, careful questions. Bernie gave careful answers. He told them everything was under control. It was the same lie he had told the world. But this time, it didn't feel convincing, not even to himself. At the same time, regulators were circling again. Old warnings resurfaced. Past reports were reread. Journalists began asking uncomfortable questions. And yet, even now, no one imagined the full truth. They suspected mismanagement. They suspected exaggeration. They suspected maybe a smaller fraud. No one imagined that the entire operation was fiction. Bernie Madoff stood at the edge of something he could no longer control. Every empire collapses differently. Some fall with violence. Some fall with exposure. Some fall slowly, quietly, and then all at once. Bernie's would be the last kind. The most tragic part of this story is not how clever Bernie Madoff was. It's how ordinary his methods were. There was no genius trading strategy. No secret algorithm. No financial magic. Just human trust. Repeated again and again. Until it broke. As December approached, the pressure became unbearable. Requests for withdrawals reached billions of dollars. Bernie had nothing left to give. And finally, he understood the truth he had avoided for nearly 50 years. You can lie to everyone. You can lie for a long time. But eventually, reality demands payment. Very soon, Bernie Madoff would make a decision that would change everything. A decision that would expose the greatest financial fraud the world had ever seen. But that moment, the confession, the arrest, the collapse, belongs to the next chapter. This episode was about the rise, the illusion, the trust. The next episode will be about the moment that illusion died. Because when the fall finally comes, it doesn't ask for permission. It takes everything. Bernie Madoff had spent his entire adult life mastering one skill above all others. Control. He controlled information. He controlled perception. He controlled fear. What he could not control anymore was the outside world. Every morning, Bernie walked into his office the same way he always had. Same suit. Same posture. Same calm expression. To anyone watching, nothing had changed. But internally, his mind was collapsing under the weight of inevitability. Each phone call felt like a threat. Each email felt like exposure. Each knock on the door felt like the end. And yet, he kept performing. Because stopping meant admitting the truth. Bernie had always believed that people didn't want honesty. They wanted reassurance. And so he gave it to them. He told investors their money was safe. He told partners the strategy was working. He told himself he would figure it out. That self-deception was the most dangerous lie of all. Late at night, when the office was empty and the phones were silent, Bernie sat alone reviewing account balances that meant nothing. Numbers that looked real, but weren't. Statements that represented lives, retirements, futures, all built on fiction. He knew exactly how many people he was hurting. And still, he continued. Because once a lie becomes too large, stopping feels more destructive than continuing. Bernie did not start this scheme with plans to destroy lives. That is what makes this story more disturbing. It began small. Manageable. Temporary. A few adjustments. A few delays. A promise to fix it later. But later never came. Instead, the lie demanded expansion. More money. More trust. More victims. And Bernie gave it willingly. What made him so convincing was not intelligence alone, it was confidence. Bernie spoke softly. He never bragged. He never chased attention. He let others promote him. Words spread quietly. Exclusively. Bernie doesn't take everyone. That illusion of scarcity became a powerful weapon. People begged to give him money. And he accepted it, knowing it would never be invested. As pressure increased, Bernie's internal circle shrank. Fewer people were allowed near sensitive information. Meetings became shorter. Answers became more vague. Silence filled the gaps. This is how fraud survives, not through brilliance, but through avoidance. Bernie often thought about legacy. Not prison. Not punishment. Legacy. How would history remember him? As a visionary? A criminal? A cautionary tale? The irony was cruel. Bernie wanted to be respected. Instead, he would become infamous. Outside the firm, families were making life decisions based on his statements. Couples retired early. Charities expanded programs. Foundations planned futures. None of them knew they were standing on air. When the collapse came, it would not just destroy accounts, it would destroy identities. People didn't just lose money. They lost dignity. Security. Trust in the world itself. Bernie understood this. And still, he waited. Because confession meant ending everything in one moment, and human beings rarely choose immediate destruction over delayed hope. Even false hope. The final weeks before the collapse were marked by one overwhelming feeling. Isolation. Bernie could not share the truth. He could not ask for help. He could not escape. The system he had created had become a prison. And he was the only inmate who knew it. Soon, the pressure would reach his family. Soon, the truth would be spoken out loud. Soon, decades of lies would unravel in a single conversation. But not yet. For now, Bernie Madoff continued to sit behind his desk, pretending that control still existed, even as the ground beneath him disappeared. This episode is not about greed alone. It is about how easily trust can be engineered. How authority silences doubt.